evaluating a child for gifted education. If you've come to this presentation, I suspect that you are thinking that your child might be a candidate for gifted education and you're looking to learn more, or perhaps you've already requested gifted testing and you're looking to understand a little bit more about what that process is going to be. Or it's also possible that you have a second grader who has been identified by us through our universal screening tool as being a candidate for potential giftedness, and you've received communication from the Office of Education that we would like to test your child, and you want to know what that means. In either case, this presentation is to try to give you some more information about what it means to have a child evaluated for gifted education. So first and foremost, if you're in the position where you're considering that this is something you might want to do, the first step is to just submit a written request that can be through email to the challenge consultant at your child's school. By sending that email, that kickstarts the process where we then will start to evaluate the student. The first level for evaluating a student for gifted education is that there is a universal screening test that students take. If students pass through that universal screening test, they then move on to level 2. And that is a full gifted multidisciplinary evaluation. So the gifted multidisciplinary evaluation is written by a certified school psychologist who administers some psychological tests as well as tests for creativity. And we also do a broad data review and incorporate teacher feedback, parental feedback, and a wide look at a lot of different factors, all of which come together to provide a very rich and full picture of the student to help us make a determination if they qualify for needing gifted services. So some facts here. Number one, gifted education is defined by Title 22, Chapter 16 in the Pennsylvania Code, and also by another document called the Gifted Educational Guidelines. And all of this is available to you online if you want to go through and see some of the detailed language. But Chapter 16 and the guidelines together are what guide districts around what it is we must do, what we're allowed to do with regard to screening and evaluation, the gifted individualized education plan documents, educational placement, curriculum and instruction, how we manage our own personnel, and the procedural safeguards for families and students. Also, the other thing to know is that a student who has a GIEP must have evidence of two things. Number one, that they have been identified as having what's called outstanding intellectual ability. And number two, that it is in need of specially designed instruction. So a student who has these two pieces together, they will then need a individualized education plan to meet their gifted needs. So in this presentation, we're going to start by focusing on number one, this outstanding intellectual ability piece. How do we determine that? What does it mean? Etc. So our understanding of giftedness is founded on Renzulli's theory of giftedness. And this is also how we incorporate something called multiple measures, which I'll speak about in just a moment. So Renzulli's theory of giftedness, as you can see here, has three components: above average intelligence, creativity, and something called task commitment. So above average intelligence in the past was the only thing that people were looking for when trying to determine who were the gifted students. And this is what we normally associate with a quote-unquote IQ score. And the old threshold was that students who had an IQ score of 130 or above, which is about 2% of the population, are those students who qualify for gifted education. However, the state of Pennsylvania over the years has taken a more nuanced view and allows us to incorporate something called multiple measures. And I'm not going to be talking about all of the elements of multiple measures in this presentation, but some of the key ones you see incorporated into Renzulli's theory of giftedness. And so in addition to above average intelligence, we also include measures of creativity and task commitment. So in this case, creativity is not referencing things like music ability, dance ability, or visual art. In this case, it's talking about something that is on the cognitive side, specifically what is called divergent thinking. So divergent thinking is our ability to have lots of ways of interpreting a single question, having multiple answers and not just one answer to a question, and seeing lots of possible alternatives. It also has a lot to do with thinking laterally and not convergently or linearly. So when we talk about creativity here, that's what we mean. We're not necessarily referencing a much broader or more common use of the term creativity. And also the idea of task commitment, a more updated or jazzy term that's been used in the last 10 years or so is the idea of grit, the ability for a student to see something through to the end. That is actually also part of giftedness. We often look at things like computer adaptive tests that can test to see if a student is above grade level, and other sort of performance metrics that point to or hint at this idea of task commitment. So when we look at all three of these components together, we can create a broad picture of a student to determine if they have outstanding intellectual ability. So now we're going to shift to the other part of the equation, is that the student is in need of specially designed instruction. So specially designed instruction is an adaptation or a modification to the general curriculum. What it means in this case is that it's something that goes beyond what a student would receive in the general ed setting. It's adapting it or modifying it for an individual student's need. So take a look at this graph. If you look along the bottom line, you can see that it is indicating grades K through 12 from left to right. And then from bottom to top is measuring what we're referencing here as the maximum rigor in general education. To use gifted terminology, what it means is, what is the maximum level of challenge that a student can receive without any specially designed instruction? So just the maximum difficulty setting in any given grade level, what is that? And you can see here that it slowly starts getting higher from grades K through 7. Then when the student reaches 7th grade, the rigor level starts increasing quite a bit from year to year to year. The reason why you see this sort of bend or an elbow in the graph is that starting in 7th grade, students move from having more generalized teachers whose certification is in all subjects and moving to teachers who each teacher has a subject-specific certification, and combine that with the availability of stratified courses. So think higher level math, ELA, science, so on and so forth, classes. And so the example here, if you're looking at 12th grade and wondering what kind of student would be at the very top of this graph, that would be a student in the general education setting, no GIEP, not gifted, but who is taking almost all of their classes as advanced placement courses. That's why the line is so high in 12th grade, is there's so many AP courses available to them at Cheltenham High School. So then when we start to look at gifted students and we think about this idea of specially designed instruction, everything you see in blue here is what we could call the zone of needed SDI. So if an individual student at any grade level has a need that goes beyond that which can be achieved in the general ed setting, that places them in the blue zone, in the zone of needed SDI. So just to illustrate two different students and what this might look like. Jane Doe, she's a very high-performing student. She was identified for gifted education early on in, say, first or second grade. And over the years, she has maintained a need for specially designed instruction, including all the way to 12th grade. She's taking all AP advancement courses, and in addition to that, she still needs something that goes beyond what can be offered in the general ed setting. So she has maintained a GIEP in grades K through 12. John Doe is also a really stellar student. He's identified as gifted education early as well, kindergarten, first grade, something like that. He maintained the need for a GIEP for many years. However, in 10th grade, there is a number of courses that are offered at the high school at the advanced placement level, but he has opted to take the honors level courses, which are still above average level courses, but there are even more challenging courses available to him that he's not taking. And so the rigor level available to him has actually surpassed what he's taking advantage of at that time. And so for him, the need for specially designed instruction has gone away. And so in his case, he had a GIEP all the way up until high school, and then when he entered into high school, he no longer needs a GIEP, not because he doesn't still have outstanding intellectual ability. He does. We've identified that. But he no longer needs specially designed instruction, the second part of the equation. And so in John's case, he does not have a GIEP as a 12th grader. So some other things to know about specially designed instruction is that it is split into two pieces. Something that we call acceleration, which can be more easily understood as distance. So think about covering ground, versus depth, which we call enrichment, which is about going deeper into content. So the classic example here is, you can see we have Esther O'Cade. In this picture, she's 10 years old, and she's a freshman in college. She's sitting shoulder to shoulder with 18 and 19-year-old students who are on the same grade level academically as she is. She has the same content knowledge that they do. She has achieved the same academic outcomes that they have. The difference is it took them 18 to 19 years to get to that place, and it took her only 10. That's an example of acceleration. Same content, just getting there faster. The other example is Einstein. He is sort of a famous example of someone who was a quote-unquote bad student. There's lots of sort of stories about him being the classic absent-minded professor, one of them which I can't corroborate if it's true or not, but there's a story that his wife left him at home with the baby. She went off to get groceries or something. He placed the baby in comfortably and carefully into a sock drawer, closed the drawer because the baby was sleeping. His wife comes home, where's the baby? He doesn't remember. And the baby at some point starts crying, and they find the baby in the sock drawer, and he's like, oh yeah, that's right, I put the baby there. So again, I don't know if that story is 100% true, but it's one that it's told of him. So that's one part of his personality. On the other hand, if you have questions about theoretical physics, who else would you go to? So that's an example of depth, having really deep understandings that go way beyond anything that you would typically find in a K-12 curriculum, but that is subject-specific or aligned to a particular interest area. That's someone who needs enrichment. So when we look at the continuum of gifted services in Cheltenham in grades K through 12, what you find is that at all grade levels, we seek to meet the individualized need of gifted students. And so you can see the blue bar there extends from K to 12. We always leave room for meeting individual needs. Then in terms of some of the programming that we plan on giving to gifted students, from grades K through 8, there is a strand of ELA services that we can provide for gifted students who are identified as needing more instruction and support around ELA. And then the same thing is true for math. Now, in this case, you can notice that math makes a little bit of a switch. In grade 7, it broadens and becomes STEM-centered. That's science, technology, engineering, and math, not just math. And the reason for that is in 7th grade, we start to offer higher level math courses. Some of them are very high, in fact. And so the mathematics specific component, the rigor level in the gen ed setting is so high that we then incorporate math into a broader approach. So students can get their mathematical needs met for those who are in that high level math class and for those who are not. And then all of this feeds into a design thinking course which makes up the gifted experience at the high school, which incorporates all of the individual needs of students, their areas of interest, their areas of needed SDI gets encapsulated into this class. So if a child meets both of these requirements, they are found to have outstanding intellectual ability and they need specially designed instruction, they will have something called a Gifted Individualized Education Plan, or GIEP for short. And the core components of it is that the GIEP will specify what our goal is for that student for that calendar year. And then it will also describe what it is the district is going to provide for specially designed instruction in order to help that student achieve their goal. That's the purpose of a GIEP. If a child has a GIEP, there are people who are responsible for making sure that the child has everything they need to be able to obtain their goals. And this starts with our challenge consultants, who are the gifted case managers in Cheltenham. In other districts, they're typically just called gifted teachers, but in Cheltenham, we call them challenge consultants. Also, the classroom teacher is responsible for anything that's found in the GIEP that relates to the general ed setting. The parents are there to support the student, be advocates, and to help guide the district in terms of identifying the right needs for the student. And then, of course, the student is also responsible for upholding their part of their role in achieving their goals as well. So just a couple quick notes about some things that are not addressed in GIEP documents. First and foremost is any weaknesses or need for remediation. It is perfectly common and reasonable and expected that a student can have a GIEP and also have needs or weakness areas that they need to try to strengthen as well. Just because a student is gifted in one area does not mean that they don't necessarily have needs in another. However, those needs are not going to be met in a GIEP document. It's possible that they can simply be met in the gen ed setting. If those needs are more acute than that, it's possible that the student may need a 504 agreement or possibly a special education IEP for other educational needs. So one of the terms we often use in gifted ed is to say that a GIEP is a strengths-based document. We are there to support their strengths. It's possible a student has some weaknesses too. That's totally normal, but it won't be addressed by the GIEP. It's common that students have both GIEPs and IEPs that work together. Also, the GIEP does not modify the school organization or structure, and it also does not require the school to provide something that we simply cannot deliver. The terms that get used is that we need to provide students with an appropriate education for their individual needs, but that is not the same thing as an ideal learning environment. If you have questions, please reach out to your child's challenge consultant, and we'd be happy to give you more information. Thank you.